I'm one of the strategic partnership advisors at Activity Alliance. And David sort of kindly invited me to come and talk to you this morning and share some insight and good practice. So, what I wanted to do was really share three things with you, and then as part of the presentation, and then kind of open it up for sort of discussion, questions, afterwards. So the first thing was just a bit of an introduction to Activity Alliance, who we are, what we do. Secondly, sharing some of our latest insight around disabled people and sport and physical activity. So hopefully a bit of a couple of hot topics, what's happening in the sector, what's happening in that landscape. And then finally, just to give you a bit of a quick overview of our new strategy, which I want to share some of our key ambitions really as an open invitation. We're really keen to work with partners and networks where we can support each other's work. So it's a bit of a kind of, this is what we're looking at doing and other opportunities to get involved and kind of work together. I'm very happy, obviously, the recordings there. I'm also happy, David, I'll share the slides with you afterwards. So welcome to circulate those out to the group. What I've tried to do is I've tried to embed links into the slides to sort of further resources, useful resources. So I've probably gone a little bit overboard in terms of how many of those I've done, but I figure if you want to look at stuff, then you're welcome to, or you can obviously get in touch. My contact details are on there. So happy to kind of signpost and have those conversations as well. So if I crack on, Activity Alliance. So who are we? We're a national charity and we're the leading voice for disabled people in sport and activity. So simplest way to describe us is we're an equality partner. And we are not entirely, but significantly funded. Our funding comes from Sport England as one of the system partners around audience. And using Sport England's own information from the Active Lives survey, we know disabled adults are almost twice as likely as non-disabled people to be physically inactive. So it's 48% disabled adults are inactive compared to 20.7% of non-disabled adults. So there's quite a big gap there. And as an organisation, we exist to try and help close that gap and get more disabled people active. I mentioned briefly, we launched our new strategy in December. 3rd of December last year, and our vision is a future where all disabled people feel they belong in sport and activity. And I really just wanted to pull out the keyword in there of belong. We've added this into our vision. It's something new we didn't have before, and it's something I think that is really resonating with us as a team, but also with a lot of the partners we're working with around. There's a difference between providing a product or a service that exists, it ticks the box, and one that really is meaningful and positive and ultimately sustainable, whether that's for disabled people or the organisations involved in providing those activities. So that word sort of belong and that sense of belonging is probably something I'll mention a couple of times as we go through this morning. As an organisation, we're a membership organisation. We were set up as essentially an umbrella body. There are lots of individual kind of impairment specific disability organisations out there who are working in the sport and activity space and the leisure space. So I put kind of our core members there, British Blind Sport, UK Deaf Sport. So a real kind of mix of different organisations. And I'd suggest if you haven't engaged with them, if you're doing some impairment specific work, they've got some fantastic resources, projects, programs. So it's certainly worth a conversation if you kind of looking at some impairment specific type work. In terms of other partners, so broader partners that we work with, I've put some examples. Again, it's pretty much an endless list. So we work with disabled people's organisations, people like Disability Rights UK, funders and sector bodies. That could be Sport England, SIMSPA, UK Active, Community Leisure UK, kind of quite a long list, active partnerships, the other equality partners. And really we're keen to work with any organisation or group of organisations that we know can make an impact and are passionate about getting more disabled people active. Bit of a caveat, we are a relatively small organisation. We're about 25 full-time equivalents covering England. So where possible, we try and maximise impact by working through kind of groups of partners, through networks. But we are happy to work and very much do work with individual organisations as well. What our role involves really is around sharing good practice and influencing and sharing stuff between these organisations and across these organisations. And everything that we do is really based on insight. It's really based on research and insight. And we spend a lot of time as an organisation talking to disabled people, talking to disability organisations, talking to partners, really trying to understand what's happening out there in the world, whether it's kind of barriers or enablers to disabled people getting active. And that's just kind of, I wanted to share some headlines with you today. So I'm going to use our annual disability and activity survey. 5 years ago, we worked with Sport England and Sport England's Insight team to set up a survey and a piece of work that really unpicked and tried to understand the why behind Sport England's data. So Active Lives obviously gives us the participation figures, participation levels, but we really wanted to try and unpick the issues of what was important to disabled people. So every year we interview about 2,000 people. We do a survey. We also do a number of kind of interviews, workshops, focus groups to really try and bring the figures to life. There are 5 areas that we've covered this year. One is participation, cost of living, outdoor spaces, mental wellbeing and representation and belonging. So I'm just in the next couple of slides just going to kind of give you some of the key headings from that. Maybe give you a little bit of food for thought or some reassurance you're on the right line, depending on where you are in your kind of inclusion journey. And what I've done is, again, I've put the link, I mentioned earlier, put the link to the survey, full survey's in there, but also to our impairment report. So we take the data and we look at it for different impairment groups. So are the barriers and enablers for someone with a visual impairment different to someone with a mobility impairment, for example? So going to the first area around participation and experience. So we've done the survey for 5 years, and the top motivation for disabled people to be active is about being healthy. You know, it could be about managing a condition, it could be about preventing a secondary conditions, or it could just be something nothing to do with their impairment that's about getting fit, losing weight. We also know, however, consistently, one of the top barriers for not being active are people's concerns about their condition. So making their condition worse, feeling they're not able to do activities because of their condition. So we found that 4 in 10 disabled people feel they've got the opportunity to be as active as they want to be. And that compares to about 7 in 10 for non-disabled people. So again, quite a big gap. And we've also found that disabled women are more likely to feel this disparity compared to disabled men. So if you take anything from today, or if you're watching this recording further down the line, if you take anything from what I'm going to say today, it would be this idea of intersectionality and how disabled people fit into that. And I know, you know, intersectionality at the moment is a bit of a buzzword, both within the disability sector and with the sort of sports and activity sector as well. But, you know, historically, we've thought about disabled people as one big group. And I will absolutely hold my hands up and say Activity Alliance are as guilty as this as anybody else. You know, we've done exactly the same thing. But we're now really starting to understand the nuances of people who've got different impairments, but also the influence of different parts of their identity, whether it's age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity. And so we're really trying to explore our own data, and are really keen to kind of encourage other organisations, if you haven't already, to really kind of explore and unpick the data as a, you know, for looking at those different demographic groups. It's not unusual for me to go to a meeting or for me to be contacted by an organisation saying, we want to get more disabled people active, or we've got a target of increasing disabled people's activity by 5% over the next 2 years. That's brilliant. That's amazing. Let's start with understanding who we are talking about. Are you talking about, you know, children? Are you talking about women and girls? And you kind of who are we talking about when we're talking about disabled people? So, yeah, that would be probably a personal and professional plea from me, and to really start thinking about those different groups and those different demographics. So coming back to the kind of lack of opportunity, which I think is linked to that understanding, the workshop participants that we kind of talked to really talked about feelings of not being understood, not being valued by society. Lots of talk things about, you know, there's still discrimination, negative attitudes, and it's making them feel like they don't belong, but also that they're not really understood. So we know in terms of what we can do and kind of the actions and recommendations that we'd make, the organisations who are working really well in this space are really valuing and really prioritising collaborating with disabled people from those different demographics, so really unpicking those differences. We also know that there's some great work happening out there in this space, but it's often happening in a single venue, maybe within a particular programme, maybe there's a particular individual who's doing some brilliant work, and it's not necessarily being shared either within the organisation, across local partners. So I know I'm looking at David, maybe there's an opportunity for this group and this network to look at how we can really sort of share learning, share good practice, share challenges, and kind of just, look at the good, the bad and the ugly together. So the second area from our report is around COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis. So I'm going to focus just a little bit more on the cost of living this morning. So 6 in 10 disabled people tell us they rely on their benefits or financial assistance to be active. And again, breaking down that data, the cost of living is disproportionately impacting disabled people who are women, younger, ethnically diverse, or have multiple impairments. Again, in the workshops, people talk to us about concerns over basic things going up, bills, the cost of energy, the cost of food, all those basics, but also talk to us about this idea of a disability tax, and this idea that it costs more to live the same quality of life. So examples that were given in the sessions were things like having to spend more on transport if you couldn't access active travel, if you couldn't access public transport. People talked to us about having special dietary requirements and that food normally being more expensive. Somebody talked to us about they're a power wheelchair user, having to plug their chair in overnight to recharge it, and just the cost of the electricity to do that was a real concern. So the conundrum for us, I think, is that it's now making, or it's continuing to make, activity for disabled people feel like a luxury rather than a necessity. And I think that's not specific to disabled people. I think there's a lot of people in that position at the moment, but there's a feeling that that's possibly more relevant and more kind of front of mind for disabled people. And I think there's a real conundrum opportunity for how we really sort of increase the value of activity for disabled people, either as individuals or amongst the partners that we're working with, and that you're working with as well. So how do we make activity for disabled people feel more of a necessity than a luxury? I'm going to say we haven't cracked that as an organisation. So again, happy to kind of open that up as a discussion. Not an easy or straightforward task, but certainly something I think we're kind of keen to look at. In terms of our recommendations from the report, this was around obviously continuing to focus funding on tackling inequalities. We know there's a lot of time and effort going into that at the moment, and again, some really good work happening. Also around inclusive commissioning, we're often sort of told, oh, we need extra money to do stuff for disabled people, and sometimes that is absolutely true, and that is the case. But a lot of time it's around that accessible and inclusive commissioning. So making sure that every penny that we either commission activities for or the resources that we deploy are really open and accessible for disabled people. Again, around coming that kind of considering the value and the practicalities of affordability and flexibility of offers. And I know there's a lot of work happening out there in this space. So it's a kind of an encouragement to keep going in those areas. So linked to that, I just wanted to flag up a piece of work that we released alongside our strategy in December. Some of you may have picked up on Sport England a couple of months ago released a social value report, social value of physical activity. And we worked with Sport England and we worked with State of Life, who are the organisation that Sport England commissioned to do that piece of work, to do this very similar piece of work for us around the social value for disabled people's physical activity specifically. So State of Life used the same Treasury endorsed methodology, they used the Wellbe method to look at the social value. And so there's lots of, again, there's a link to the report there, there's lots of information in that report, but two of the things that are particularly kind of significant and interesting for us as an organisation and our partners is that the wellbeing benefits of physical activity are greater for disabled people than non-disabled people, which probably logically makes some sense. But also we explored different physical activity levels. So we looked at sort of the CMO level of activities, 150 minutes of activity a week. We also looked at moderate, so anything between kind of 1 and 150 minutes, and also light activity. So this was movement that involved some effort, but didn't necessarily raise heart rate or breathing levels. And what we found is that for non-disabled people, social value really kind of kicks in significantly at those higher levels of activity, so more towards your 150 minutes. But for disabled people, that kind of social value really kicks in much earlier, so around the kind of light and moderate, which is not the case or is not as significant for non-disabled people. So I've put a link to the report there. There's also a video summary, a link there that State of Life did. It's 12 minutes, a really nice explainer of the findings and the approach. I'm conscious that social value is can be quite a complex technical area. I wasn't directly involved with this piece of work, but if you are, it's something you are interested in, there's contact details in the report, but feel free to get in touch and I will happily link you in with the team that were working on that as well. So coming back to our survey findings, the third area is around outdoor spaces. So parks, woodlands, countryside, so the green and blue spaces. Again, consistently over the 5 years, outdoor spaces are a real kind of top preference where disabled people want to be active. We think that's linked to the benefits of being outside, benefits of being out in nature and green spaces, but also linked to the cost or perceived cost that those activities are free or lower cost, generally speaking. But less than half of the respondents that we talked to said that it's easy for disabled people to access outdoor spaces. And when we kind of unpicked that a little bit more, a lot of it is around planning of the activity. So not necessarily the activity itself, but around the planning. And that was making sort of adding anxiety and uncertainty and barriers to the process of getting active. And really they fall into two main categories. One is probably around infrastructure, quite often lack of infrastructure, but not always. And then communication. So disabled people saying there wasn't as much information available as they'd like around accessibility. So, were there accessible parking spaces? Were there benches available? Were there accessible public toilets? If they got somewhere, was there a waymarked route? Was there an easy route they could follow, they wouldn't get lost? Or were they going to get halfway down a track and find there was a gate or a stile that they couldn't get over? There was also perceived expense and difficulty of travelling to some of those spaces. So if it's in a town centre, city centre, park, that's probably not too bad. But the difficulty of getting to places that are a little bit more kind of out of the centre and out of that kind of transport hubs. And a general lack of support to access outdoor spaces. So disabled people were saying they felt a bit kind of left on their own to figure it out. And there were some really positive comments around things like health walks, where there were people available that they could talk to, and they could ask questions. People knew the area, people knew the kind of could answer their questions. So for us, there is something there around that communication as well as the infrastructure itself. So again, recommendations is considering that infrastructure and providing that information. And we've got great examples where organisations are going out and talking to those who are already operating in outdoor spaces about accessibility, or they're going to disability organisations and saying, how do we help you and use expertise to look at getting more disabled people feeling confident and comfortable in outdoor spaces. And what we've found is that quite often it's not necessarily about providing lots of new infrastructure. It's really about promoting what's already there. And there's a real kind of lack of information. Some great examples. We've spoken with Natural England recently and RSPB, who are doing a lot of work on their nature reserves, providing access information, providing access guides. So there's some great examples there. Again, if anyone's interested, I can kind of signpost you to some of those. But yeah, not necessarily about providing new, but providing that information. The fourth area is around sort of mental health, so mental well-being and loneliness. And again, we've found consistently disabled people experience significantly poorer mental health and well-being and higher levels of loneliness than non-disabled people. 20% in our survey say they often or always feel lonely, and that's quite consistent with other surveys that kind of monitor similar figures. And probably worryingly, or most worryingly for us, is that trend is getting worse. Over the 5 years we've been doing the survey, that has got worse. If we want to take a positive out of it, 2/3 of disabled people agree that being active could help them feel less lonely. So there is a real kind of knowledge and acknowledgement that being active could help. People talk to us, about meeting new people, doing new things, learning new skills. So there is that kind of knowledge that being active is something that could be good and could be positive and could be helpful. But for us, it's how do we harness that into action and how do we harness that into activity? Again, some of the organisations that we know are doing great work in this area are helping to really foster that sense of belonging and community I talked about earlier. Disabled people we talked to said they might have been asked to fill in a survey or they might have been asked to attend a one-off focus group, but actually they didn't really feel like they were able to influence and really get their needs across. So they weren't involved in that decision making. They weren't really being understood. And that was making them feel like those opportunities weren't for them and not feeling confident and comfortable to attend. Also kind of looking at ways around reducing anxiety. So again, that could be linking in with the kind of formal mental health services, local professional services, but also some of the more informal things around campaigns, messaging, providing information. Disabled people raised a number of things that were not fully specific to them, but particularly did affect disabled people. So things around body image, things about affording the right kit. What is the right kit? What can I wear? Actually, do I need specialist equipment? And also around being age appropriate. So we had an example of there's a woman in her 30s, she was 32, who essentially wanted falls prevention, an intervention around falls prevention. And they'd been sort of referred to the falls prevention class, not unreasonable on the face of it, but got there and everyone was in their 70s and 80s. And she said, I just don't feel confident in that space. I would love for there to be a different way of me being able to achieve that intervention. Obviously, that's a specific example, not the same across the country, but really encouraging those conversations, really encouraging that kind of what is making people anxious and how can we kind of help to support that and turn that real kind of knowledge and an interest in activity as a way to help mental health and bringing that into action. The fifth and final area in terms of our findings around representation and belonging. So again, disabled people often say they feel overlooked, underrepresented in many areas, so not just sport and activity, but including the sport and activity sector. In our findings, just 17% they see people like me working in sport and activity, and there were similar figures for seeing people like me working as volunteers or seeing people like me as participants. And again, breaking down the data, we found that certain groups were more interested in roles in delivering activity. So disabled men, younger disabled people, and disabled people in lower social grades. Could argue that's possibly representative of the sector at the moment, generally speaking, not exclusively. So there's a real opportunity to sort of look at how can we recruit those who are interested into the sector, but also how do we kind of find those who and can appeal to those who don't necessarily fit into those groups as well. One of the things that we talk about in terms of recommendations is embedding inclusive practice into recruitment, training and retention. And I know there's some fantastic work out there around recruitment. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy going into that kind of recruitment process. So we've got great examples of people looking at flexibility of roles, looking at the application process. Instead of putting in a written application form, people are saying, you can submit a voice note, you can submit a video recording, for example, hybrid interviews, online interviews. Again, great examples of organisations working with local disability organisations, local colleges, looking at apprenticeships and all those kind of things. So some really good work. So if you are doing that, please keep doing it. It is slowly but surely making a difference. But one of the areas that, again, kind of flag as a bit of a hot topic in the sector at the moment is more around the training and retention. So that idea of kind of training and progression, continuous professional development, and people really kind of staying within the sector and progressing within the sector. We had examples where disabled people telling us they couldn't access some of the training options. So they wanted to get a certain qualification to progress in their role, but actually they couldn't. The training was held at a venue that was inaccessible. The e-learning module they were sent, they couldn't read it with their screen reader. Or we had people who were dyslexic just saying there's just too much information. I can't do it within the expected time scale. So accessibility of training was a real kind of barrier for a lot of people. And also that just kind of feeling kind of welcomed and part of the sector. Well, if I can't access training, am I meant to be here? So coming back to that sense of belonging. I think for us as a sector, but also as a society, I think we really need to question, how many disabled people are there on boards? How many disabled people are there in leadership teams? How are disabled people really influencing and working at lots of different levels within an organisation across the breadth of the organisation? We, I think, are starting to make an inroads with that kind of entry level roles, but how can we really look at that kind of organisational wide approach to getting more disabled people working with us? And I think there's going to be some really exciting and kind of innovative work over the next few years around how we develop, how about we train, we mentor the talent we already have and attract new disabled talent to the sector. So I think that's a really exciting area. One of the pieces of work that we released again last year was a piece of work into what we researched into the workforce gap. So looking at disabled people specifically in the sport and physical activity workforce. So a lot of the information that's out there at the moment is generic for disabled people working. It's not specific to the sport and activity and sort of leisure sector. The report looks at barriers and enablers for what we've called getting in, staying in and moving on. So the getting in, obviously your recruitment side of things, and the staying in and moving on, that kind of retention and progression side of things. So the executive report was published in November. We will be producing a full report and lots of case studies, which I'm told will be in February. So again, I can flag those, I can send that to David and share that with the group when that comes out. But the executive summary is there. You're very welcome to go and have a look at that. We've also done a webinar last year, which is called Towards a More Diverse and Representative Workforce. And that was lots of disabled people talking about their experiences of working, again, specifically in sport and activity and leisure. So some good practice, bad practice, lots of top tips. It's about 45 minutes. So again, might be a nice coffee break type activity. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly the links are there and say happy to link you up with our workforce team as well. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour through our annual survey and some of the kind of key things that we're finding and some of the topics that are really kind of being talked about within the sector at the moment. I'm conscious that is lots of different areas, but I'm hoping there's something in there for each of the organisations, depending on where you are in your inclusion journey, that might have sparked some thoughts, raised some ideas, or just provided some reassurance that actually you are on the right track, you are working in the right areas. So I just wanted to finish before I kind of hand back to David and potentially some questions and discussion is around our strategic goals. I kind of nearly called this slide wish list, if I'm honest, because we're really keen to work with organisations, I said at the beginning, around getting more disabled people active, whether that's as participants, as part of the workforce, as volunteers. So these are kind of our opportunities to collaborate and again, welcome any discussion either online or offline around some of these areas. So I've put this out as a bit of a wish list, bit of food for thought, but really it's an open invitation to how can we work together, how can we support each other. Our new strategy, so launched in December, is called We All Belong. That's our strategy on a page, which has made our comms team very happy, I must say. And I just wanted to point out the ambition. So we've identified 3 key ambitions, which are along the bottom of the screen. The first one is around sports and activities meeting disabled people's needs. So, disabled people being able to access the benefits of being active. The second ambition is around disabled people influencing campaigning, policy and decision making. So that's about disabled people's voice and really that giving platform and opportunity for disabled people to be heard. And the third ambition is around addressing inequalities by working with others. So this is, our collective voice. We are Activity Alliance. We're an alliance of partners. So this is around our collective voices and that idea of being sort of stronger together. So what I've done is I've taken out of our operational plan for 2025-2026 some of the key headlines under these ambitions. Not an exhaustive list by a long way, but certainly be interested to talk to any organisations who are working in this space, want to work in this space, to come and have a conversation. So for our first ambition around sport and activity meeting disabled people's needs, we are looking around learning and embedding inclusive practices, working around the inequality in the workforce agenda, which I mentioned earlier. So any learning, any data, any good practice, any opportunities to do a bit of test and learn, for example, would be really welcome. Our second ambition around influencing campaigning, policy and decision making, we're really looking at how we can find platforms and events and forums where we can put disabled people's voices front and centre. So that could be on a national level, it could be more regionally or locally. Certainly influencing policy discussion, consultations and campaigns. As an organisation, we try and respond to as many of those as we can, but it's always helpful for organisations to flag up and say, actually, this would be really helpful if you could get involved with this. Or is there information that we could provide to you on a more local level that would help you to respond to kind of local sort of policy discussions, campaigns, conversations that are happening? One that I'm particularly interested in is around maximising investment, and this is really for us around that inclusive commissioning. So whether that's in the formal sense or whether kind of how we deploy our resources. Whether that's as an organisation, whether we can influence our supply chains, the training providers, the equipment suppliers, all of the other great things that make our sector tick. And then the final area around addressing inequalities by working together. So we are an alliance. We want that movement of committed partners to be stronger together. So we're keen to work with expert partners, recognising you are experts in sport and activity provision, you are experts in your community and place-based activities. As a national organisation, we're trying to understand and how we add value to some of those place-based activities in a real kind of efficient and effective way. So again, be very up for conversations in those areas. So that is our wish list. As I say, happy to pick up those discussions now or separately. And then I mentioned earlier, I will share the slides with David and get him to share them with the group. Just flagged up some final useful resources. That's a link and there's a QR code there if anyone wants it, to all of our resources. The majority of them are free. You can just download them from our website. We've got fact sheets, we've got toolkits, we've got research reports. So that's a link to everything that pretty much everything that we have. I would flag up specifically our leisure fact sheets. So these were written about 2 years ago, specifically for kind of the leisure sector, and it's based on probably about 20 years of experience, I think, working with projects like the Inclusive Fitness Initiative, Quest, a lot of our learning of working with organisations in the sector. So there are 10 fact sheets. They all cover different topics, things, strategy, leadership, through to accessible venues, workforce development. So if you are new or particularly interested in any of these areas, certainly worth a look at the fact sheets. They provide advice, good practice, top tips. Again, maybe a bit of a checklist for those of you who are further down your inclusion journey to say, yeah, we're doing all of those things. And then finally, I say we have a lot of resources. So I've just put some sort of shortcuts to some of the key areas that I know organisations in the activity and sort of leisure sector have potentially found useful. So there's some work in there around customer service training. There's something in there around our partnerships, leadership, links to our research and insight. So I talked about our annual survey today, but there's a much kind of broader range of insight that we've got available, inclusive marketing and comms resources, and our place-based learning is part of our Get Out, Get Active programme. So just a few shortcuts to say set you on your way. But again, happy to get in touch and have a conversation either with myself, or I can link you with colleagues who are sort of experts in these areas. And if you want to do that, those are my contact details. So yeah, very happy to take email, phone calls, whatever works for you. And I've also put Activity Alliance's sort of social media channels there as well. So if you want to follow, we always promote kind of our latest findings, our latest resources, any of our events are always pushed out through those channels. So if you want to follow kind of what we're up to, then that's a really good way of doing it. So I think that's probably enough from me initially, and kind of hand back to David.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dawn. Really useful. I've got three things that I want to raise, but I always go to my audience first. So, Darren, Aidan, Andy, anything you want to add before I throw my penn'orth in?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. If I can cut in and David in response to that, and just say I thought that was really, really useful, and clearly you're knowledgeable and well established in terms of your focus and support for the for the sector and that awareness. Where I am, we have a range of the facilities are used by adult social daycare for and incorporated into leisure side. So we've got that, and I'm conscious that we do have one or two groups who utilise facilities as well. But to make it more accessible and inclusive, you've kind of sparked some further ideas or questions for me. Is there in the wealth of information that you've just been alluding to, Dawn? Is there a local disability groups national network that you've got a list of and so on that we could tap into or not? I don't know.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of tapping into groups, so there are probably three main things. One is the organisations that I mentioned at the beginning, so the National Disability Sport organisations.
Yeah.
A lot of them do have kind of regional based offers and offices and things. So I would certainly sort of think about contacting them. We have we pull together all the Sport England funded disability system partners.
Yeah.
So again, we can tap into that network and kind of help around that. So we're looking for something in this particular part of the country. But we also have, so I am part of the partnerships team and I actually cover the East Midlands region, and we have offices based kind of that cover around the country. So again, it's be happy to put you in touch with your local kind of advisor who can talk to you about what's kind of happening in the area. If we have one vacancy at the moment for an advisor, but if not, a lot of the work we do is with the active partnerships, and the active partnerships are quite often aware of the kind of disability organisations in their area as well. So there isn't one way of doing it. There's probably a couple of different ways, and if one doesn't work, then the other will. But certainly, I say happy to put you in touch with the engagement advisor that covers your region. Again, David, what I'll probably do is we've got a map that shows who covers which.
Okay,
that'd be their detail. So if I share that with the group, that would be a first point of call. But yeah, certainly there are ways of tackling that one.
Yeah. And I think you were indicating that you're going to be releasing some case studies in terms of so benchmarks and best practice and so on later next month. So that would be quite useful in terms of, you can see the context of, what other organisations and how it works elsewhere. So
definitely. So the workforce piece, I'm told it's February. Probably make a liar out of me now. It'll probably be next week or in like April. But so that piece will come out. And it's really again for us about sharing that good practice and sharing those ideas, because we find, and it's probably the biggest frustration for us as an organisation, but probably all the partners I work with, there's some really good pockets of good practice, and you kind of you stumble over stuff by accident. So what we're trying to do is kind of pull some of that together and say, here it is. This isn't the definitive. This isn't everything, but let's use it to start this conversation. So I will absolutely make sure that is flagged up. But say if you follow any of our social media channels or get your comms teams too, we will certainly be shouting about that very loudly. So yeah, welcome to kind of look at that. And if you want to kind of pick up a conversation, again, happy to do that.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Dawn.
I'll give an undertaking, Dawn. If you send it to me when it comes out, I'll send it to the whole network as well, so that we can get that as quickly as possible. So
perfect. Yeah.
Aidan, Andy, anything you want to add?
I just wanted to say thank you because you've increased my knowledge base, and I'm probably not doing enough. So I'm just going to dive into the resources that you've provided in that pack. I think it's just an area of focus that we haven't really done enough. We've got the water wellbeing accreditation, we have a pool pod and stuff like that. So the aquatic side of things, I think we're probably doing enough, except for maybe the programming. But I think from a dry side, we've had a recent grant about improving accessibility for the facility itself. But in terms of programming on dry side, I think there's a lot more we could do. So I'm going to dig into your resources and maybe tap into some of the local organisations. So thanks for coming on, because it's made a highlight to me.
No problem. And as I say, happy to link you in with kind of any organisations that we're aware of locally. I would say, really tapping into the learning from the swimming side of things and moving that across into the dry side. You'd be probably surprised how much expertise you've already got internally.
It's weird, because years ago, so in my degree, so I was a sports inclusion development officer for a while in a former life. So it's something that I've not tapped into realistically, and we don't have a focus on it, and it's what we need to basically. I think we need to get back into that type of from the dry, especially from the sports hall. I'm just thinking locally when you were talking, we just don't have a lot. We really don't have a lot of provision locally, and I don't know why that is. From a physical activity point of view. So I'm going to have a touch. I'm going to get in touch with the community development officers as well, see what's going on.
Perfect.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to seeing how that goes.
Excellent. And that's the whole point of doing these types of things, isn't it? It just puts things back into the front of your mind, which is really useful. Andy, anything from you before I chip in?
We do stuff. I will certainly take this back to our sports development team, because we have got some really good active officers they were getting out with. We were doing quite well before COVID, and then we obviously and I'm guilty of grouping them the same as what you said, that persons with a disability took a lot longer to come back. So our established groups took well over a year plus to come back into the centres, and we're just building that back up again now. We're just having a new changing places facility built at one of our sites now, so that's going to assist significantly over there. So I suppose what I was sort of just going to ask is two, not questions, but more queries. Where you talk about all your statistics you've got, is this the whole range of persons with a disability, from people with dyslexia right up to people who, can't move, completely paraplegics? Yeah.
So when we as an organisation talk about disabled people, we talk about sort of, I suppose, disability long-term conditions. So anything that's a condition, an impairment or an illness that has a substantial effect on somebody's ability to do the kind of day-to-day tasks. So that covers, you could say, anything from, say, dyslexia through to mobility impairments and everything else. It's really interesting, and I think, again, for organisations, when we go in and talk to them, is everybody defines it differently. Everybody and every organisation defines disabled people differently. So sometimes it's worth having that conversation internally of saying, are we all on the same page? Are we all talking about the same group of people, or groups, plural, of people here? So that's potentially a valuable conversation as well, to say, who are we? Part of that, who are we talking about conversation. But certainly the information that we've put out and those statistics is for anyone with a, say, health condition, impairment, illness that has that substantial effect on activities, day-to-day activities. And the sample that we use is representative of the UK population. So in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, and all those kind of things as well.
Okay, that was lovely. Thank you. My next thing I was going to ask is, do you come with or signpost to funding opportunities?
Directly, no. So Activity Alliance are a strategic organisation. We're not a funding body, but we do potentially work with organisations who are. So again, we tend to work through the active partnerships in terms of identifying funding pots. Some of the partners locally will also be able to access pots that you can't. So some of the disability organisations may be able to access something from the disability sector that as a more kind of formal provider you might not be able to. So in terms of those conversations, I would suggest, active partnerships definitely have normally a good handle on what's available locally, what's coming through Sport England, those kind of things. But conversations with local disability organisations about other areas you might not have thought of to look for funding. Right. But it's not unnecessarily an easy win, and a lot of the funding is very dependent on obviously showing the evidence that what's needed. And again, so that's where some of those conversations with groups locally can make a really big difference and can help you kind of bolster that bid.
Okay. I'm just thinking, because we're doing some free bursaries with people with mental health issues, or and we're working with a disability organisation to offer some, but clearly it's a cost to us, and we're doing it all FOC on the basis that it may engender increased activity, and again, they might bring buddies and carers and all that sort of thing to train with them. But I just wondered if there was sort of money out there available. So that was sort of one of my questions that might help it support it in the long term, make it more sustainable. But anyway, thank you very much for your time as well. Really appreciated it.
Very welcome.
Thanks, Dawn.
David, you've been patiently waiting there.
No. It's always interesting to see where these things come from. And what I love about the presentation, it was data based, and we work on data, we work on insight. That's where we are. And what strikes me here, and you were allowed to slap me as a result of this, is actually what you're talking about is very, very similar across the people who haven't got a disability. So actually a lot of stuff that we do as organizations to try and attract those people, which we're all working at, those people who are inactive, etc., with a little bit of extra thought would be attractive to people with disabilities as well. So one of my questions is, does your organization have the ability to say to people, look, if you're creating a marketing campaign to get inactive active, can we have a look at it and just say, if you did this, this, and this, that campaign would be applicable across the population of the UK, included disabled people, so that we're almost killing two birds with one stone. Rather than creating something that's new and special and specific, is it worth looking at how do we make our campaigns more inclusive?
Yes, is the easy answer to that one. I think for us, this is around this idea of inclusion. So we do, for some people, disability specific is needed, whether that's through campaigns, whether it's through the products and programs we provide, but actually it's the real idea of inclusion. So in terms of campaigns, yes, hitting those, whether it's around increasing confidence, whether it's around, highlighting the benefits of activity, what's available. So all of those things, it's really, if we commission those properly, if we deploy our resources properly, it's about making those inclusive and accessible to as many people as possible. What we would probably say from a disability point of view is make sure that campaign gets out to disabled people, make sure it gets out to disability groups, make sure it gets out to health services who will be talking to disabled people. We may also talk about some of the technicalities of, don't do everything digitally. Not everybody can access digital communications, and the digital communications you have, make sure they're screen reader compatible, or make sure there's good text and sizes and fonts are clear, and those kind of things. So we would probably come in with that bit of a disability nuance, if you like, or some of the specifics. But you're right, taking an inclusive approach is really, it can work for a lot of people. And I think this is where, we always need something separate for disabled people isn't true. And I think that's one of the perceptions that we're trying to break down as an organisation, that actually really good, inclusive projects and programs that think about disability at the beginning.
Yeah.
You can weave a lot of that in without it costing extra, or without it necessarily having to be something that's very bespoke.
And I think that's my point. I think organizations just need that confidence that what they're doing is inclusive, or actually you need to think just a little bit differently about here and here in order to make that campaign inclusive. And that will have an effect. It will do the more general stuff, and it will do the lower hanging fruit. I totally agree. And we need to continue to work specific at targeted stuff. But I think there's an importance there. The other bit for me is around governance, and it's really interesting when you talk about disabled people on boards. And I've had the pleasure of working with Mark Woods for 6 years. He's a Paralympic swimmer.
Yeah.
But he's not the people we're trying to attract. And I'm not sure when we do get disabled people on board that actually we get the right people, because we tend to go for the athlete, the person who's been involved in sport and physical activity all their life. And actually, and I would say actually this is boards across the piece. You know, I get on boards. Why do I get on boards? Because I'm a professional and knowledgeable and I've got some ideas, but I'm not the people we're trying to attract because I'm on my bike 1,600 miles a year. You know, I'm in the gym, I'm in the squash, etc. And it's how do we make sure that those voices that we do attract to boards are actually the voices of the people we really want to attract into our businesses.
And I think that's a challenge for a lot of organisations. I think we also find, so as a disability organisation, we do have a lot to say with people on our boards, which is not unsurprising. But we also find it tends to be the same people that kind of go around between the same boards. So for us, it's like, how do we mentor? How do we kind of find people who might be interested but aren't necessarily confident, or because they've not been on a board, struggle to get on a board? Everybody wants, not necessarily unreasonably, people to come in and be fully there and fully up to speed and be board members. You know, there's a lot of time and effort needs to go into those training and development activities. So I think there is something there for us as a sector where we need to try and understand how we can help people who are thinking about it, who may have the skills, but maybe have some of the skills of how we can really influence those programs. There are some initiatives out there that are trying to increase diversity on boards. We're certainly shouting for disabled people to be part of those. We're also keen that if people are running programs around developing boards or developing board members, so those training courses, those to say those governance kind of information that people don't necessarily pick up in their day-to-day lives, is how do we kind of get disabled people on those courses? How do we make sure that they're accessible and available? So it comes down to this training, professional development type thing. Is that accessible? Yeah, I think there is a big piece of work to do there. In the, I'd say short term, but also as more of a longer term solution, we have got organisations who are recognising that even if you do get a disabled person on the board, that is only one person. It's only their opinion. It's only, it's only their experience. So they are looking at ways of how that lived experience is being fed into board decisions or leadership decisions. So we've got examples of people setting up kind of equality impact groups. We've got people who are kind of setting up panels that will feed in activity. We've got making sure that disability or equality or whatever is on the agenda. It's a standing agenda item. Bringing in people who within the teams who are working around the inclusion agenda, working around the equality or the tackling inequality agenda, bringing them into those meetings and being able to sort of talk and educate as well. So absolutely, we need more people with lived experience in every sense, David, on the board. But I think it's being really clever as well about how we feed that information in, because the board will only ever be a group, or the leadership team will only ever be a group of people with specific lived experience.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dawn. I get brought in onto board meetings as a specialist. So they just bring me in for a particular element, which I think there's a great opportunity around boards for that, to bring that voice in as and when it's required, rather than expect people to be committed to 5 meetings a year or whatever. I know Aidan's looking at board development at the moment, so I'm hoping some of that has just resonated with Aidan around what could be done around that. And I'm currently working with an organisation to look at creating a shadow board that's a learning and development board, so that people can practice their skills, their opportunity, their knowledge, how to behave, how to act within a board, so that can feed into the main board. So we're looking at actually how do we create a shadow board that may actually contribute anyway, but this is more about a melting pot of development opportunities. So I'll share that with you once I've got a little bit closer, because I'd like some support and guidance around how we make sure it's inclusive.
That would be fantastic. I'd be really interested in kind of looking at that piece of work and seeing if we can support. Definitely.
Okay,
Same to Aidan, if there's any work there. We did a more of an internal piece of work about a year ago, looking at inclusive boards and looking at disabled people. So we had a number of organisations that we spoke to. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? But we also talked to disabled people who had either been on a board, who were thinking about being on a board, and kind of their experiences of that process. So again, happy to share some of that if that would help.
Okay, excellent, good. Anybody got anything further for Dawn? Okay, so Dawn, if you send me the presentation and any of the additional links, I'll include those with the link to this recording so people can see it across the network. Apologies again that we've not got a great turnout, but I think we have some really interesting questions there, and I'm hoping people will gain from the recording. So Dawn, thank you very much. I'm just going to turn the recording off now.